everybody. Welcome to episode 8, season 1 of the Aftermarket Insider. I'm your host, Joe Sebergandio, and this is your podcast for Tuesday, June the 2nd, 2020. I would be remiss if I didn't extend another, I think it's my 500th happy birthday wish to my wife, Linda. Linda, if you're listening, I know you are. Happy birthday. I hope you had a good day yesterday, and I hope we have a great year this year. Speaking of this year, this is the this would be the final month of the first half of what's been a pretty testy 2020, right? This is June, guys. So we've gone through a lot these last 3 months. In LA, we've been experiencing, as most of you know, a lot of commotion. There's been some substantial looting that's been taking place. We've had the National Guard here. There were also some unfortunate circumstances that took place last night in Las Vegas and in Louisville. And, you know, I just hope that we can get to a place of calm in the midst of the pandemic and the uncertainty that brought these protests and this looting. It's just something that we all didn't need. So if you're listening, I hope that you're all safe and remain that way. And I want to thank you for taking some time in your day to join us here on the podcast. We have a great podcast in store for you today, folks. One of the guys that I have not only worked alongside with since the 80s, but a gentleman whose name, face, and voice you'll immediately recognize. He's Doug Evans. Doug's going to be joining us as our guest today on the podcast. We also will be having Clarence Barnes coming in a little bit later on to do the Barnes Report. And those of you who know Clarence is out there with a lot of spinning plates happening. And we'll talk a little bit about Doug, because Clarence and Doug have known each other for a very, very long time and have spent a lot of time on the road together. So we'll get some funny anecdotes and some stories later on. I also want to encourage those of you who are followers of the Aftermarket Insider Facebook page to also tell a friend, make them aware of it. We are now in our 8th episode, and we're hoping to build a library of about at least, 20 by the time we hit the SEMA show in Las Vegas. And we're looking forward to a lot of the future success with the podcast. About Doug Evans. Doug Evans and I started to work together, I want to say in the 80s. Doug and I had similar style jobs. We worked at Peterson Publishing Company selling ads. We also spent some time in events. We also spent some time working at the SEMA show. We were Cub ad sales reps. We became supervisors and managers amongst our peers. We became leaders and vice presidents in similar capacities. And we enjoyed the opportunity to work with many folks that helped mentor us and many folks that made a substantial impact, not only in the industry, but in our lives, particularly guys like Ralph Panico, John Diana, Lee Kelly, and many, many others. We also worked with a lot of guys that are our friends now. Guys like Jim Savvis and guys like Peter McGillivray and John Cobb and Mark Dewey and Scott Timberlake and Brad Gerber. All these guys are names that we all share. So when I was crafting the list of guests, Doug was one of those guys that obviously I wanted to have on the podcast. And it's kind of tough because Doug's busy. Doug's probably one of the busiest guys, whether if you look at his career, his jobs, where he's lived. He bounces around like a young pup, and I don't know how he does it. We were just sharing the fact that both of us are having a tough time seeing without glasses. And, we've been to every city 50 times, which means Doug's been there 500 times. So I wonder, and we'll find out just how he continues to do that. Doug is currently in St. Augustine, Florida. He is married to the talented and lovely Robin. Doug's a Midwestern guy. He's a former Marine. He graduated from Valparaiso. He is a bass player, and I want to find out what kind of bass he plays. And he's an overall great guy. He currently is heading up high performance consulting. He's doing some consulting work for the folks over at COMPCAMS, a name that's iconic in the industry. He spent time at Peterson. He spent time at Bonnier. He spent time with Lucan Communications. He spent time with Family Events. He's done a lot, and he's not stopping. And he's here, and he's with us today. Doug, welcome to the podcast. How are you? Let's get Doug's mic on.
Is that better?
Oh, there you go. Hey, Doug, welcome to the podcast.
Hey, Joe, how are you? Thanks. Operator error.
Look, I'm still doing it, Doug. I was putting the earphones over my mouth earlier, so this is all new to us. How are you today, Doug?
Doing fine. I'm doing fine. I'm kind of like you. It's like what else can happen in the year 2020, but we keep going, right?
Yeah. What's the old saying? What doesn't kill us makes us stronger, right?
Exactly.
So I was fast forwarding thinking that you had gone back towards the Tampa, Lakeland, Merritt Island area, but you're actually now a little bit north. You're almost in my old stomping grounds. You're north of Daytona in St. Augustine. When did you move there, Doug?
Robin and I moved up here right as the whole COVID thing was kicking off. We had a place on Merritt Island, and we had just put it on the market. And then all of that started to break, and we didn't think anything was going to happen. Lo and behold, somebody wanted to buy it, so we sold it. And then with everything turning out the way it did, there was no time to find a place to buy, so we just moved into a rental for now. But St. Augustine is where Robin's kids are, so we're up close to them, which is great. And happy to be up here. It's fun so far.
I love that area. I love that area just north of Daytona. Is it Palm Coast up near Flagler? And then you just keep going up as your way to Jacksonville. And St. Augustine is just one of those stops. And it's one of those quaint little towns. Honestly, I'd prefer the St. Augustine area than the Jacksonville activity. So I'm glad that you found a home there, Doug. And maybe that's a place where you'll hang your hat for a little while.
Well, I hope so. I keep saying that, this is going to be the last time I do a house, and I think the last one was number 11. So I'm hoping that this one is the final one as soon as we find it and get moved into a permanent place.
Well, we are at that point, whether it's the time of our lives or our career or our next houses or whatever, that we're kind of enjoying heading into not so much the end, but kind of the twilight of what it is that we've been able to do over these last 40 years or so. I know that you were doing some work and remain on as a consultant, helping the folks over at Crowder. And then prior to that, I know that you had just substantial job after job after job after job. And these aren't call-in jobs. These are jobs where you're accountable constantly. You're meeting face-to-face constantly. You're deciding the fate of companies with their budgets of their employees. And how have you been able to, Doug? Because personally, I don't know if I have that in me anymore. How have you been able to still just do all that?
Well, you're very gracious. Thank you. I mean, I've had a bunch of great opportunities, and I think I try to always treat people the way I would be treated. And when given the opportunity to help lead a company and do it the right way, which fortunately I've had several of those opportunities, I jump in and do it and try to make practical decisions that are fair, aggressive but fair. And that's worked out pretty well.
Talk to us a little bit about high performance consulting. This is something that is currently your focus. Give us a little bit of an idea of how that idea became a reality and what your overall intention is with high performance consulting.
Sure, Joe. It's a little LLC that I formed because I found myself, like you, I've been in this industry for 40 something years now, and you're constantly talking to people, weighing in, and people are asking advice and, how can I help? So I just formalized it a little bit, which gives me the opportunity to work with a variety of businesses as opposed to just one. Coming in through the industry the way I did, I got exposed to all sides of it, just like you did, from manufacturing to warehouses to retail to marketing to pure selling to shows. With that experience, it gives me the ability to kind of move around and talk to people about different needs and help as I can.
There's always been a positive takeaway for those of us who are sought after for advice or to fast track folks. I'm sure you get more of the questions about getting a business established and keeping on track. Most of the inquiries that folks have of me are, hey, who do you know over here? Or, who do you know over there? And I do, and I'm sure that you do, enjoy helping folks. That's got to be one of the biggest advantages that I've found myself having over all these years, is that when that phone rings and somebody's a little bit off kilter and they don't know who to call or where to go, and you just know it naturally, you point it to them and they find success. That still is one of the good positive takeaways that we enjoy.
Oh, it's huge. You know, I had the good fortune to be part of the creation of the Launchpad program at SEMA. And a couple of the first, winners, Johnny Mill and Ian Leon, they're both still good friends of mine. Those guys came in with great ideas and have launched really nice careers in the industry. And SEMA's done a great job with that program, and it's cool to see. And it's a delight to help people. And you and I grew up in that culture. I mean, you remember what Bob Peterson always used to say. He said, if you're a good consultant to your customer and you help your customer succeed, you'll never have to ask for an ad. It'll come to you because you're an integral part of their business. And that's how we learn.
Yeah, partners versus sales reps was always the notoriety that you look towards. Well, I want to try to put together a quick little timeline for those folks who may be listening. Once again, thanks for listening to the Aftermarket Insider podcast. We're joined today with Doug Evans. Doug is currently focusing in on high performance consulting. He has spent some time recently working and advising as the president and CEO of Crower, and now remains on there continuing to consult with them. Doug, when you first started off, my recollection is, and please update me as we go along, if I recall, I remember the Chicago office. I remember names like Dewey and Glenn Booker. And I remember, I think that my best memory is you being a rep in the Chicago office. Is that where this all started?
Well, actually, before that, I worked at Young and Rubicam, which at the time was it actually still is a very large ad agency, but at that time it was the biggest agency in the world and one of the biggest in Chicago. My job was to plan and buy magazine advertising. And I'm an old car guy, as you know, and it became readily apparent to me that the guys selling me advertising in the magazines were making a lot more money and having a lot more fun than I was. So I kind of decided that I'd like to go do that. And if I could do it anywhere, where would it be? And that, of course, was Hot Rod Magazine. So I went about the business of getting a guy by the name of Dwayne Placco to hire me, who was the Midwest manager at the time. And he came after Denny Banner, who you may remember.
I certainly do.
And Glenn was, I think Glenn Booker started 3 months before me as my supervisor. So yeah, that is how I kind of joined the family.
So Glenn was calling on you. You were the agency. What accounts were you representing at the time?
Lincoln Mercury was my exposure. I had the dealer group for Lincoln Mercury, all of the dealer associations. Then I had the fascinating job of planning media for Hunter ceiling fans.
Got one.
I had a women's feminine hygiene product. And I had Wesley Jessen contact lenses and Terminex bug spray.
Quite the kaleidoscope there.
Yeah, but I also had a brand of Miller beer called Miller Special Reserve when the super premium category launched. So I had quite a portfolio of accounts that I was working on.
So Booker and the Chicago guys would court you for some biz, and you've seen them for the meetings. And Christ, at the time, there were probably flip chart proposals that those guys were probably trying to put your way and take you to the Bulls games, into the Blackhawk games to get you to buy stuff. And then ultimately you swapped sides, so to speak, and you became now the partner and the salesman. Did you who got you the job at Peterson then? Who was ultimately responsible for hiring?
Well, Dwayne Placco. I mean, I blindly sent Dwayne a resume and started bothering him and bothering Glenn. And eventually they just got worn out and said, I give up and we'll hire you. So I blame them.
So that job was slinging ads in the Chicago office. Were you calling on the non-endemics? Were you calling on the endemics? Who were you calling on, Doug?
Calling on endemics. So the aftermarket, that was right when Peterson had formed the Automotive Performance Group under John Diana. Our old friend Harry Hibbler was publisher of Hot Rod. And CJ Baker, we had just started Circle Track magazine. Gentleman, Bob Vanderkamp, you may remember him. He's another old agency guy. He was publisher of Four Wheel and Off Road. Because at that time, we only had 5 automotive titles.
Yeah, I think there was, I think Carcraft as well. I'm not sure if Adolph was steering the ship on that.
He was.
Yeah, so APG, for those of you, we're speaking in abbreviations, and the APG was the Automotive Performance Group. That was back at a time when I think there were 4 books: Hot Rod, Carcraft, Four Wheel and Off Road, and Circle Track. And I remember both of us being overwhelmed because we had always just had single book responsibility so that you could be really experts in your designated area. So the truck guy for Four Wheel and Off Road wasn't talking to anybody about buying ads in Hot Rod. And then it just became apparent to management that we weren't doing well efficiently. So everybody being able to represent 4 books now was going to be the new mantra. And that was overwhelming for a lot of folks. And it was a lot more shirts, and it was a lot more everything, and it was a lot more events. And I remember being fortunate enough to be a part of that group that you mentioned at APG. And that was the beginning of that next big growth step for our company at the time, Peterson. And your career kind of, it continued to grow. So you had that APG job in Chicago, and then guys like Cobb started coming around, and Savis. And was it John Cobb that you worked with where you took your next step working with the company? Did you go to New York, Doug?
Yeah, correct. I had actually gone to family events to work on the Peterson events out of Indianapolis. And then I had a brief moment of insanity and decided that I wanted to be a real magazine guy and moved to New York City and worked for Condé Nast on a new launch called Details Magazine, if you remember that. It was a young guy's GQ.
Yes.
And after 3 years of that, Peterson had sold and they had acquired Dobbs in Lakeland, Florida. And John Cobb had risen up through the ranks from being a rep in New York to now management, and called me and asked me if I wanted to come back. And I said, well, for a guy who lives on his boat in New York City, winter's coming and Florida doesn't sound too bad. So I did, and came back, I think then, as the publisher of Muscle Car Review and Mopar Muscle. And from there, I just started adding titles to my groups.
When knowing the fashionista that you are and how fashion conscious you are, how did the connection with Details come together?
Well, knowing my other habits at the time, they needed a liquor and tobacco rep for the category. So they thought, we should hire Doug to do that. So that's how I ended up there. And then ultimately I ended up going over to Hachette as an ad director on another young lifestyle magazine called Swing, which was for Ralph Lauren's son, David. That launched at the same time George launched with Kennedy. And I did that. And then that actually is when Cobb called and said, hey, come on back. And I ran as fast as I could back to the automotive world. A little more suited for that.
Well, hey, man, good effort on trying. Let's face it, those are all the jobs that you're mentioning are far from easily to attain jobs. These are like jobs that everybody in that automotive and ad industry was probably going after. And you kind of stumbled upon them and vice versa. And it seems like it worked out good. Living on a boat in New York, how do you do that? Like, where is the boat?
Well, I have my boat. There's actually two places to do it. In Manhattan itself, you can live in the 79th Street boat basin. But I decided I would rather be able to look at New York off the back of my boat at night. So I went across the Hudson River to Weehawken, which is right on the border of Hoboken where the Lincoln Tunnel comes out. And that's right around Midtown for people who are New York knowledgeable. And every night I get to watch the sunset and the city glow, and it was nice. It was nice. It took me maybe 30 minutes via ferry to get to my office in Midtown every day. It was fun, except for the winter. The winters weren't so fun.
I'm just loving, Doug, that you're actually doing what you wanted to do, and it didn't stop there. When you got the call to go to Florida, you mentioned the Dobbs publications. For those of you listening, Dobbs was, with all due respect, like a tertiary publishing company in the automotive industry. Obviously, Peterson was at the top. There were some secondary publications. Maybe some of the McMullen or Argus books could fall into that category. And then there were countless others. But Dobbs was really working hard to be somebody. They weren't just somebody that was a flash in the pan. They had good talent. I think they tried to emulate a lot of what Peterson did. And that acquisition was a good one. At least it appeared that way as we were, I guess, gobbling up some of the competitors. Interesting time for everyone. Did you find comfort in that position? Because it was far from a plug and go. There was a lot of work that needed to be done, not only in Lakeland, but with a lot of the business that was happening within the company. You stepped into a pretty big job there.
Yeah, it was very challenging, actually, for a lot of the reasons you mentioned. I mean, we were all fierce competitors, as you will remember. Larry Dobbs actually started his company by running a little 1/12th ad in the back of Hot Rod magazine, sold to him by our old friend Terry Shiver from the Atlanta office, who actually worked with me down there once we acquired Dobbs, and he started Mustang Monthly with Donald Farr as the editor, who is Mr. Mustang, a renowned editorial guy. Guys like Mark Houlihan, great group of guys. But to get everybody on board with a similar culture, I think there was some resentment of the Peterson way versus the way everybody else did it. The Dobbs thing, they were small, and being pushed into a large company, which Peterson was pretty difficult. And then, of course, the real challenge came when we merged with McMullen Argus in the Prime Media days, because that was fierce competitors and a bunch of magazines that were directly competitive with each other, like Muscle Mustangs and Fast Fords and 5.0 Mustang. Same audience, same competition. So we first had to get everybody to agree to be friends, and then we had to figure out how to differentiate the message and the audience for each magazine, but we did it. One time we had 5 different Mustang titles, and they all addressed a little bit of a different audience.
Yeah.
And everybody got on.
Well, there was, we would be 3 deep in the truck category, and there was a time when if an idea came up and it was an idea that was fueled by the editorial staff and they wanted to try something, they launched a book. If there could have been a situation where potential ad sales could have gotten us to start to think about another book, they tried that. The problem they had is that with all the acquisitions and the internal new books that we were creating, there were too many books in each category. There were too many truck books or too many Mustang books, and then being able to qualify and keep or cut a lot of the books, a lot of the titles, a lot of the people, that became the norm. And I guess that's the tough part of that job, was through assessing what we had and focusing in on where we wanted to go in the future, not everybody made that cut. Probably one of the tougher parts of the job, huh?
Oh yeah, that was brutal stuff, and of course the entire magazine industry ultimately got challenged in the same way we were early on. But the whole distribution method of magazines was incredibly inefficient, as you know. I mean, what other business do you make 10 widgets and pat yourself on the back if you sell 4 of them and only throw 6 of them away? Yeah. And that's the newsstand. And of course, newsstands are now gone, and that's the #1 source of subscribers. So the cool thing is, with the way media has changed, this show being an example, is it's kind of a brave new world again for people to launch new stuff and be as vertical as they choose to be without all of those pricing pressures of physically having to produce a paper product and distribute it. So it's neat. Unfortunately, there was a lot of pain to get where we're at, but it's been fun watching it develop, and watching it develop further is going to be interesting too.
Have you come to any conclusions, or you have any feelings about the continued consolidation of magazines that's currently taking place? And obviously they're down to like 3 printed publications with Motor Trend, Hot Rod, Four Wheeler. What have you heard, and what's your take on the consolidation of those printed magazines now in our automotive industry?
Well, I'm pretty much hearing what everybody else is. I mean, my observation is that the Motor Trend group is still a bunch of quality people. I mean, a lot of our friends are still there, but they're the joint venture was with Discovery. Discovery is a TV centric company. That's what they understand. That's what they do best, and they are doing that extraordinarily well. The pricing pressures are still there on the print side. I think it's going to depend on what they choose to do. In my view, the way forward on the print side is more what Rodder's Journal has always done, probably a little less frequency, a much higher quality paper and product, and a higher price point for the consumer to get it delivered to their house. I think if they choose to go that way, those magazines will succeed, and there's space for them.
Yeah. So Rodder's Journal, which was actually topical on one of our recent podcasts with Carson Lev, for all the reasons you mentioned, those are coffee table magazines that you leave on your table. They're pieces of art, every page, the photography, the color, the stories. Unlike what we're used to with run-of-the-mill monthly publications where you're not even done reading them and another one shows up, they almost become tossaways, I hate to say. So yes, I enjoy a print publication if it's involving an activity or something I'm passionate about, but my expectations of the experience are that I want it to be worth my time. And I think, yes, that would be the direction. Candidly, the automotive magazines that you and I grew up with, they left that path. They were sharing cover images. They were sharing advertisers in the same positions. The back of the book all looked the same. It was as if it got into a cookie cutter mold and somebody just inserted a couple of cars and a couple of stories and just shipped it out. And people have shown that they just don't want something that's just put out there now. They want something that's worth their time, effort, and energy. And I really do hope, because I wasn't feeling so cool with the magazines I was getting when they were this thin and there wasn't much value. I kind of felt bad because those are the magazines we grew up with. And I wanted the excitement that I used to get when I opened up those books then, now, and I don't get it. So hopefully that'll pick up. And to your point, a lot of good guys still over there, a lot of good guys that unfortunately are no longer there. Guys like Jerome Deaches and Mark Dewey and Scott Timberlake. So for all those folks who we grew up with, who are out of work now and are in transition, do you have anything motivational that you want to say to them, or any words of encouragement to some of our buddies, Doug, that unfortunately got caught up in this whole shuffle?
Oh, I just remember how valuable you are, and just find a way to make yourself relevant. And there are people out there making it happen. I mean, Brian Brennan and Tim Foss just launched Modern Rodder and a truck book, and it's going to be both paper and electronic. All of those guys that you mentioned have brilliant marketing minds. So they'd be an asset to any aftermarket company that they chose to call on and try to help. They've got decades of experience in going to market in each one of their niches. And so don't let it get you down. Just keep plugging away.
Doug, one of the current topics on the podcast, in fact, we have Kevin and Kelly Ostie helping us out, is trying to find folks a path or a game plan for young folks, and even folks our age now that may be out of work in the industry, trying to help folks get into the automotive aftermarket to enjoy all the good experiences and challenges that we had. Love to see some other folks jump into it. Do you have any suggestions or any tips that you would give a young person that may be entertaining coming into our industry?
Follow your heart, follow your passion. I mean, that's an overused phrase, I think, but I think it's very true. I mean, don't come in expecting to be the CEO in 6 months, but do what you got to do to get into the industry and grow from there. Kevin Ostie and his wife are a great example of what you can do when you really believe in the industry and yourself. I mean, Kevin was one of the first producers of Hot Rod TV on our staff out in California, and Kelly helped him in that job. And then he went off on his own. He had a dream to start a restoration business, so he did that. And he not only does that, he's got a very successful show of his own now, VA TV. And, there's a guy who followed his heart. And, the beginning job working for Hot Rod, producing that show was tough because it was the beginning days of automotive television. And unfortunately for Kevin, he had a bunch of magazine guys trying to tell him how to do a TV show, which is probably pretty tough.
Yeah.
But he pulled it off. So good for them. And, young people could look at that and say, yeah, okay, I get it.
Yeah. What a good example. For those of you who have an interest in getting into our industry, check out Kevin Ostie. In fact, all of us got a little Kevin Ostie story, and it was based largely on just following what's out there, asking for the order, right? Ask for the order. Yeah. Doug, you finalized and were the senior vice president of Source Interlink, and that entailed not only Watchdog in the magazines, but the events, the manufacturing. If you weren't in a meeting about a happy or an upset advertiser, you were in a meeting with a happy or an upset guy in circulation. And when you walked out of there, you had an ME that needed a hug or an ad coordinator that needed a slap. You had a couple sales guys that were killing it that you couldn't get a hold of on the phone. And all the guys who couldn't sell shit, you couldn't get off the phone. You were able to get through all that stuff. And what do you remember about the time that you were senior vice president of Source Interlink? What were some of the bigger challenges that you were dealing with there during your last tenure? Was it events? Was it just the new folks? What was going on back then?
Well, a couple of things. One, right after that acquisition, we got acquired by Source Interlink. First of all, they were a distribution company. They weren't a publisher, so that they distributed magazines. They didn't publish them, so it was kind of a brave new world and an education process for their senior management, both us to them and them to us, because I learned a lot from them too. But the financial pressures with each ownership change of that company people spent a lot of money, and with that comes pressure for return on investment, of course. And then, boom, the 2008 recession hit in the middle of all that. And all of the pressure on the publishing industry started to really come home to roost. I think at that time, the industry had consolidated down to only 4 distribution companies for magazines nationally. And keep in mind that back then, magazine distribution had their own fleet of trucks. They all went out and serviced every newsstand every day, taking old magazines off, putting new ones on. So it's a very labor-intensive, expensive business. Remembering for a product that you print 10 of and throw 6 of the 10 away and think you were successful.
Right.
So all of that made it difficult. And then trying to figure out a way to keep as many of those titles afloat as we could, because all those people were like family. They were my coworkers, my friends, and trying to keep all of them positive financially in order to keep them going. So that was probably the biggest challenge.
I remember many conversations with folks that were intimately included and involved during those times, and many of them talked about not being around if it weren't for you. So you really helped a lot of those guys, and a lot of those guys are still thankful of your efforts. Guys like Jerry Pitt, our buddy Steve, who was the editorial guy for all the Mustang books. And even some of the folks that weren't involved with Peterson, but were young upstarts. You mentioned Johnny Mills and some others. You've kind of been that mentor guy, not only because of your experience and because of the different roles you've had, and not just because of your stature or the presence that you command when you come into a room. What is it that you think attracts some of these folks that are looking for some guidance? You think it's your no bullshit approach to things and your practical way of solving problems? What do you think it is, Doug, that you project that get these folks to want to work with you or have you mentor them?
Well, first of all, your flattery is considerable. Thank you. I consider myself very fortunate to have had all of those people around me in the middle of that. And I learned probably twice as much from them as they ever learned from me. Maybe it's that. I think we all realized we were in it together, and that I always try to lead from the front. We're gonna go together and take care of this problem. I'm not gonna send you out to do it. We're gonna do it together. I think all of the people that I worked with over the years had the same attitude, and that's why we made a good team.
So you left the Source Interleague gig in a pretty high position, and you started to do a bunch of other things. You took some time. You worked. Well, we worked together at Lucan Communications when they launched Revin. I believe you had a cup of coffee with Bonnier. You have consulted with some of the folks that are major players in our industry. But I want to talk a little bit about the substantial efforts and the time that you have committed to working with SEMA. I know that you've been on the board of directors. You have a passion for PAC. When you see Doug at the SEMA show, he's usually the host and working with a lot of political and governmental personnel and staff and objectives at the SEMA show. You've been hands-on with the Washington rally. You've worked with SEMA Cares, which is a big thing, particularly with Joel Ayers. You have really spent a lot of time. You mentioned the launch pad with SEMA. How enjoyable has your time been with helping the folks out at SEMA?
Oh, well, SEMA, what a wonderful experience. I mean, it's, I got involved, an old friend of ours by the name of Jim Worth, who you may remember.
Certainly do.
Had a little ad agency in the aftermarket, and he just does some events too in Ohio, swap meets.
Worth and Associates. Yep.
Yeah, he was on the ARMO Select Committee, which is the restoration arm of SEMA. And he said, we need a Peterson guy to get involved in this. Are you interested? And I said, well, you know, I've been to the SEMA show. I like it. Sure. Tell me what it's about. So I did, and really enjoyed it because it's companies coming together to solve industry problems. And when you think about the show, and you have been intimately involved with the SEMA show too, Joe, you can probably quote the square footage of that show better than me. It's like 3.5 million square feet or something, right?
Pretty close.
It's 3.5 million square feet of stuff that nobody has to have. It's stuff that people really, really want and people are passionate about. And it's the stuff that dreams are made of and people work their whole lives to achieve. It has made careers for a lot of our friends and families. It's just a really tight group of people. So the ability to serve on the association that works in that industry was a privilege for me. Altogether about 20 years, I think, in one capacity or another. I elected to get involved in the political side because at that time, our company reached about 50 million people a month, and it was the most efficient way to get the word out for something threatening the industry. So you may remember when the Cash for Clunkers bill came out, that was a huge problem potentially. And we came out with about 20 magazine covers with a big circle and a red slash through the cover image to get some attention to what was going on. And it worked. The bill was changed substantially as a result of the pressure that was put on Washington to change it. So that's why the political involvement. And, you know, everything from closing wilderness areas to off-roaders to people trying to make aftermarket exhaust systems illegal. I mean, it's one thing after another. A lot of times it's unintended consequences for a politician that thinks they're doing something good, but they don't realize the negative. So we just bring that to their attention.
And that on its own, the volunteering, whether it was for ARMO or sitting on the board or whatever, those are full-time jobs on their own, in addition to your other full-time jobs. Both of them have pressure, despite the fact that you're volunteering. It still doesn't mean that you have a task at hand and you've got time, efforts, and energies that you've got to focus on to make changes. Again, just another full-time job on an already full plate. Are you at that place ever, Doug, when you were doing both, working full-time and serving on the SEMA board? Were you ever not working? I mean, how did you break away? How did you find a little Doug time in light of so much going on the Monday through Friday?
Well, you know, I think Doug time is working. So, you know, probably finding me my happiest is when I was manning the barbecue for sponsors on the Hot Rod Power Tour, because that was working, but it was also spending time with my friends, helping to oversee an event which you had a part of building. Thank you. And just enjoying what we all do for a living. I mean, you know, that event and the SEMA show are both an epitome of why we do what we do. I mean, people hanging out with their cars, having a good time, being with their families, seeing the United States, being with each other, just being positive. So it's great stuff. So that is Doug time.
Yeah, you know, and when I hear you say that, Doug, I think therein lies the reason why folks should get involved in our industry, because although it may appear as if they are tough and it takes time and there's pressure, it's really around something that you're really passionate about. So it doesn't really kind of come across as work. So that's half the battle right there. I would hate to think that we'd be in the textile industry or the garment industry and have to attend those style shows. You know, we're going to a place where there's 69 Camaros and Hemi Cudas and Chip Fooses and Doug Evans. So it really is, it's more of a, we look at it as our job, but for anybody else looking in, it's fun. So it was nice that you combined those two. That probably made it much more manageable for you.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. We used to have a joke about it at the SEMA board meetings where we'd say, well, we could be with the Pallet Manufacturers Association.
Sure.
And there really is a Pallet Manufacturers Association, and they really do have a trade show.
It's a trade show for everything.
So we're doing okay.
Well, I would be remiss to not ask, what do you think was your biggest accomplishment while you were there with SEMA? What do you think, if you're going to hang your hat? Could it be the Clunker initiative? Was there something else maybe that was involving SEMA Cares or PAC? What's the one Doug moment that you look back with most fondness in terms of what you were able to help with?
I think certainly both of those things. I think youth engagement was also an area that I put a lot of focus on. So we started taking members of the Young Executive Network, bringing them on to Power Tour, having them fan out to schools and junior colleges all along the route. We created a job board for young people trying to get into the industry.
One of my favorites still.
Yeah, it's awesome. And Wade Kawasaki had a big hand in that too, by the way, who was chairman after me. But all of those youth initiatives, I think, are key because, as I used to say, if we don't get that right, none of the rest of it matters. I mean, the automotive hobby is a graying demographic, and we've got to get young people off the couch and not playing video games and out doing the real thing. And we've had a reasonable amount of success doing that. I'm really proud of the young people who are coming into the industry and excited about what they're doing.
Is that one of the biggest focuses and challenges right now for SEMA, is to continue to have interest from the youth within the automotive aftermarket?
I think that's one. I think vehicle technology is another. It's called ADAS. Everything's got an acronym. But all of the new technology that you see coming out on automobiles makes them more complex to work on. And as you know, I mean, this whole industry was founded on do-it-yourselfers and people creating products that they could bolt on their own cars. But even, those fancy things now, when you start to go over a line into another lane where an alarm goes off, so you get a dent and you got to repaint your fender, there's a sensor under there now that you've got to take care of when you repaint the car. Now, having said all that, it's also an opportunity. Not too many years ago, you remember when the third brake lights came out for the rear window?
Certainly did.
That was first an option. Then it became a requirement from NHTSA. Well, the number one selling aftermarket part number for 3 years in a row was aftermarket third brake lights for cars. So companies can make money on it. It's just getting a little more complicated and harder to do. So we need the tech exchange program that SEMA's got, the measuring sessions that everybody can take advantage of to get specs on cars before they hit the market. But it's a challenge, and the harder they are to work on, it's harder to get people into the garage as young people because it's like, oh my God, how do I do it? Well, we got to show them how to do it.
Well, we're going to try to do that here in the Aftermarket Insider. We talked a little bit. The program is the segment of the program is called "Make It Count." That was Kevin's name because he remembers being told that, like, make it count. If you're going to go for a job, you're going to go for an interview, you're going to start working on your vehicle, you're going to do anything, think it out, make it count. And I'd love to continue to have a dialogue with you, Doug, about ways that we may be able to further help and fast forward many of the young folks looking to get into the SEMA automotive aftermarket world. You talked about the SEMA job board. I love that. Please check that out. We talked about the SEMA garage. Mike Spagnola heads that up. That's an opportunity for folks to take advantage of. Many of you have, some of you haven't. You can find out more about that. As we kind of head around third, Doug, in the podcast, I want to play a little game with you, just a name game about some of the folks that have been a part of our career. I want to start off with a gentleman that you mentioned earlier, who's unfortunately no longer with us, Terry Shiver. What do you remember about Terry that you could share with us?
Oh, his nickname was the Mouth of the South. Anybody who knew Terry, he always had a Marlboro in one hand, a cup of coffee in the other, or scotch.
Or Coca-Cola.
Yeah, and he was he had a big booming voice, but he was a sweet guy, and Terry had the distinction of being the only branch manager at Peterson. He ran the Atlanta office, and he was the only branch manager that ever made his numbers, his budget, on every magazine that Peterson published in a single year. Which he celebrated by going out and getting a Rolex, which is a whole other story that we won't tell here.
Yeah.
But Terry was a dear friend. He and I had the opportunity to work again together when I came back to the company. He came back too because he had left. And one of the reasons when John Cobb asked me to come back, one of the reasons that I immediately said yes is Terry was there and sitting in another publisher seat. And he and I got to work together for a long time again after that. And he was a great guy.
Yeah, without a doubt. We definitely lost him way too soon. Terry brought a certain professionalism too. He was always dressed to the T. He could converse with the bellman or the owner of the hotel. There was no better to enjoy a cocktail with. There was no better person, at least at the beginning of the cocktails. And I miss him dearly. Dick Hill.
Dick Hill. Oh, he's another great one, along with his son, Patrick, who worked for me in Lakeland. Dick was always, oh, wait a minute. I'm confusing my hills. You're talking about Dick Hill from Center Forks.
Dick, who we lost, yes,
sorry.
back in November.
Wrong Dick Hill. That Dick Hill. Dick Hill is that Dick Hill. Both Dick Hills are a great friend, but that particular Dick Hill is awesome. He's another guy. He was on the board with me. What I loved about Dick is he had spent a lot of years in the industry in a number of capacities, and you could always count on Dick for a reality check. He was fun. He never took himself too seriously. But another great friend. I mean, you say, Dick, what do you think? And he would always tell you his honest opinion. And I spent a lot of time with him and another friend, Chris Thompson, both on the board at the same time. And they were great sounding boards and good friends.
Yeah, I felt the same. Whenever you ran into Dick, there was not a wasted second. You know, he looked you in the eyes. It wasn't just talk. It was genuine. And another one of those guys. Unfortunately, Doug, we're at that point where in our age, a lot of those guys that were older friends of ours are leaving us. So, yeah, we'll miss guys like Terry and Dick. How about Jim Savas? He's a guy that you spend a lot of time with. He's worked with us in so many different capacities. I continue to remain good friends with him. In fact, we were even chatting last night. How about Jim? What do you remember the most about Jim?
Oh, Jim and I were roommates together. Jim had recently been divorced at that point and needed a place, and I was out in California all the time, so we rented a little cottage together in Venice Beach. And those of people who know both Jim and I know that we're very different people. I have a tendency to stay up late. And Jim is one of these guys who gets up at 6 o'clock in the morning, turns on really terrible music, and turns on every light in the house and starts dancing around. Well, this was a small place, so it made it interesting when I was in town. That, and you could barely get into the shower because there were 27 bottles of hair products in there because he was in his hair. I said, are we opening a drugstore or are we renting an apartment here? Anyway, Savis, another great friend. He's another guy who believed in me and promoted me at a critical time. And just a nice guy, loyal guy, and he's doing great now. And I haven't talked to him in a while, but when you do, tell him I said hello.
I certainly will. Again, he's doing well, and him and Amy are having a blast. And I'll be sure to mention to him that we talked. How about Michelle Turzin, or Turs as you affectionately refer to her? We worked together for a long time. She's a great one, isn't she?
Oh, yeah. I was talking about her the other day. Michelle Turzin has never had a bad day. I mean, the most amazing thing about her is we could have absolute chaos. We could have tornadoes, buildings getting blown down, just absolute havoc on the power tour, and she would be all smiles, doing her job, getting it done. First one up, never a bad word to say. Hard worker, loyal as the day is long. Michelle is awesome, and I think is still at Motor Trend, working with the TV guys, and they're very lucky to have her. She's fantastic.
Yes, she helped me clean up my act. To your point, she puts things in perspective. It's not ever as big of a problem as you think. You're never really as good as you think you are. She didn't mind telling you that either every once in a while. So she was a good person to put us in check. And let's face it was a heavily dominated boys club. She came in there and cracked the whip, and I think we all respected her, not only by what she was able to do, but she also treated us like brothers. There was always, when you got a hug from Michelle, you knew everything was going to be all right. And I knew that she was a big part of your team, and I know she meant a lot. Another guy I wanted to ask you with, and maybe we'll kind of finish this up on Freiberger, David Freiberger.
David Freiberger. David and I obviously have a long, great history together. And congratulations to David. I mean, he's got a tiger by the tail with his show, and he's doing fantastic with Finnegan with Roadkill. And I remember when he wanted to start that thing, I was still at the company, and I said, "Really, you're going to name it Roadkill?" With a typical Freiberger. Oh yeah, it's great. It's great. Well, it turns out he was right. But David is an absolutely brilliant marketing mind. I mean, he's an entertainer. He's very creative, very knowledgeable car guy. But what a lot of people don't know about David is David can analyze a market and a situation in a heartbeat and tell you what it needs and what's wrong with it. So I frequently, over the years, went to David when I was having trouble with one of the brands or the magazines or an event. I'd say, "David, what's wrong with this? What do you think?" And in typical, Freiberger fashion, I'd get 30 pages of notes back the next day about everything that was wrong with it and what I should do to fix it. And more often than not, he was right on the money. Loyal guy, great guy, talented guy. So, and, without a doubt, one of the most significant people ever on Hot Rod Magazine. He and I did the relaunch of Hot Rod because he was finally frustrated with corporate guys, cutting the package down to 92 pages, which prompted me to go into the then CEO and ask him what month he wanted me to kill Hot Rod Magazine. And I walked out with $1 million investment in Hot Rod, and David figured out how to do it, and we did it and made the money back in one issue because he nailed it. He got it right and continues to.
And he was never the type of guy that would go to you, say, "Hey, look, everything is wrong. You're doing it all backwards, and here's what you needed to do." He never volunteered there. He waited for someone to come to him. He didn't flaunt it. And
right.
As I helped Roadkill independently 2 or 3 years back, I got a chance to really work with David beyond the normal working capacities that I had with him in the past. And I was involved in a lot of meetings that were inclusive of a lot of smart guys that couldn't find their way out of the room. And David very patiently would wait for his turn to talk. Usually it was at the end, and he would connect all the dots and put a little bow on it and present it. And to your point, it usually worked. And it was nice to watch him grow from an editorial staffer who didn't want to talk to anybody, just wanted to work on cars and write stories, to probably one of the most well-spoken, most articulate, intelligent guys that's ever walked into the Peterson building. So yeah, he's a unique one. And so are you, Doug. On behalf of all the folks in this industry that make it up, all the folks that you worked with in the past, that you still continue to work with, those folks that are no longer with us, you've been a big part of our careers. You've been a big part of our fraternity. Our friendship is like anything else. We went through a lot. Not all of them good. Most of them good. Some of them not so good. But you're still there, and you're still a beacon for many. Is there anybody that you'd like to give a shout out to, or anybody that you'd like to recognize before we wrap up here, Doug?
Oh, just I'd recognize guys like you who keep the flame lit. Thank you.
Thank you.
Reaching out and helping people share their knowledge. So thank you, Joe Sebergandio. I'm excited about some of the young people in the industry. Again, guys like Johnny Mill and Ian Leon. I like the work that the SEMA board is doing. I know that they're doing everything they can do to try to make the show happen in the fall. And we all want that to happen, and I have faith. And of course, I would be remiss if I didn't thank a guy by the name of Bob Peterson for not only changing my life by what he created with Hot Rod, in terms of giving me something to be passionate about, because I found it by finding his magazines. I didn't come from a car family. But his creation and all the people that he hired and his company certainly provided a career for me and an industry that I'm very passionate about. So there's another guy I want to remember who's up there hopefully smiling down on us, thinking about, okay, what are you guys going to go do today to make a difference?
Yeah, well, I think if he is looking down, he'll have a smile when it comes to you. Doug, thank you so much. I'd like to have you back on the podcast if your schedule permits. He's Doug Evans, folks. He's currently heading up High Performance Consulting. For those of you who are in the industry and maybe need a little bit of direction or focus or some contacts or some connections, Doug, how can folks get a hold of you?
Well, it's High Performance Advisors. So D Evans, highperformanceadvisors.com. You can also find me on Facebook, and happy to answer a text there as well.
All right. So that's how you get a hold of him. We'll be seeing Doug at the SEMA show in November. It's all positive, full speed ahead for the SEMA show. Doug, thanks so much for being a part of the podcast, and enjoy the rest of your afternoon, the rest of your week, and be safe. Talk to you soon, Doug.
Thanks, Joe.
Awesome. All right, folks. So there you have it. Doug Evans, High Performance Consulting. You can just get a sense of what a great career Doug's had in this industry. I've had a blast spending some time with him. I'm sure many of you who are listening feel the same. Before we wrap up the podcast, I would like to bring in a guest of the show with his own report. He's the man with the plan. He's the voice of our industry. I'm not sure what he's been up to lately. Let's bring him on. Clarence Barnes with the Barnes Report. Clarence, how are you today?
I am trapped. I'm trapped here in the studio in the basement and sheltering in place. But I'm so happy to see Doug, because Doug Evans, there's always a good story when you're on the road. You know, we did the Hot Rod Power Tour for so many years. Doug was responsible for me standing on stage and launching so many different parts of my career as everyone else. But Doug is kind of an intimidating guy. For those of you guys who've never been chased around SEMA with a Crower cam, Doug, take a Crower cam. No, seriously though, you know, he's an intimidating guy. And I met him on the Hot Rod Power Tour one time, and And I'm just I felt like I was in grad school. I'm standing there and there's Doug and he's kind of running the whole show. And he looks at me, goes, "What are you doing?" I'm like, "I don't know." He goes, "Who are you?" I'm like telling him. And he goes, "Hop in the car. We got to go to the hotel." I'm like, "Okay." And all of a sudden I'm thinking, he just talked to me. So Doug has a bunch of cars. Really quickly, quick story. Doug has a bunch of cars. Every car has to be big. I got a big box Chevy. I got a big this. I got an Impala. I got one of these things. Well, this year he had a Mustang. And this thing was just freshly restored top to bottom. Had a huge motor in it. Had injectors, just sticking out through the hood. And it's the type of ride that when you drive, it's kind of like driving a cup car, like ready to go on the track. And it was lumpy. You start it up. So he gets in there, goes, here's the keys. You drive. I got to make some calls. I'm freaking out. I'm shaking. So I get the thing. Then I turn it on. It's like, bah, 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 like this going on. And I'm trying to drive to the hotel. And he goes, "You could drive, right?" I'm like, "Yes." I'm thinking this is a one-off Mustang. But Doug's always not only the type of guy who'll hand you the keys to his car, but he'll hand you the keys to his friendship and his generosity and his loyalty. And Doug, it's been great seeing you on the show today. And you're just, whether it's SEMA Action Network, SEMA Pack, Launchpad, all the different stuff you've done for my personal love of motorsports and stuff. But gosh, everybody's hitting us about this Swing magazine subscription. I guess you were involved in Swing. You're a big star. No, listen, seriously, I can't thank you enough. It's been so many great stories and so much fun being on the Hot Rod Power Tour and so many more to come. But it's truly amazing. And thanks for being on the show today, Doug, for sure.
Well, Clarence, one of the things that you and I chatted about is that smile on his face when he's cooking on the Power Tour. I don't think that he finds himself in any happier place than barbecuing on the Power Tour. And with any luck, maybe you guys will be doing that. Anything new on the Power Tour? I understand, again, focusing.
Just going through a couple of dates and some of the activities that happened, everything had to be rewired. They basically took this whole event and swapped it with a month. So as Doug can attest to, every day is rewiring all the different events, whether it's a drag day or something like that, to go along with the show. But a lot of people are talking about making it out this year, and I think everybody's excited to open up and get on the road. So can't wait to see that. It's going to be a lot of fun, and hopefully Doug will be out there. Pick a car, any car. He's got a bunch of them. So it sure would be great to see you guys out there too, for sure.
And Clarence, how are you holding up? You're still in Boston now?
Things are great. Yeah, I'm about to hit the road. We got a bunch of different projects happening. But yeah, I'm in Boston. It's been crazy here as it is in my old neighborhood in LA. Kind of going back and forth up till when this happened. But hopefully we'll hit the road pretty soon. And of course, Hot Rods in August. That's going to be here before we know it. But there's a lot of things happening. I don't know if you guys saw this. Shout out to Chris Jacobs too. Chris Jacobs put Bob and Doug on Discovery Channel, put them up there in the SpaceX capsule, which is kind of cool. So everybody's, yeah, it was amazing. You did a great job. No pressure. Everybody's eye was on this thing. I'm sitting there praying it's going to happen. It took off. Of course, it got postponed, but it was a really exceptional job. So another true car guy, Chris Jacobs, out there making it happen. So
I was just talking to one of his representatives, Reed Morales, who represents Chris, working with him on a couple of things with Pioneer. Yeah, Chris is one of those guys. And look, I think we're all hopeful that some of these Zoom conferences will be replaced with face-to-face conversations, and phone calls will be replaced by maybe sit-down lunches. And I'm looking forward to seeing all you guys hopefully soon. We are focusing in on the Bonnier events now. We have events slated for Indianapolis and St. Paul. And although with the recent activities in St. Paul make things a little bit uncertain, we remain positive and hopeful. We're going to get through this, folks. It's just one of those things. That's what we do as Americans. We get through shit. And this has been a great podcast for me. Clarence, thank you for joining us and rounding us out. We'll check in with you next week as well to find out maybe some of the latest activities that are happening in our industry, as well as an update on some of the events. Our next podcast is slated for next Tuesday, June the 9th at 11 a.m. right here on Facebook Live, where we'll be joined by former CEO of SEMA and longtime pal Chuck Blum. Chuck Blum was the guy behind the SEMA car for many years when SEMA was becoming what it is known today. And believe me, If you don't think things were handled differently back then than they are now, you're in for a big surprise. Chuck is an icon in our industry, has had decades of experience, not only with SEMA, but the SEMA show. We'll look forward to finding out some of the more memorable times that Chuck has in his mind about his time with SEMA and maybe his take on what's happening nowadays. So it's Chuck Blum. He'll be with us on the 9th. I'd like to thank our friends from Pioneer Car Electronics. Don't forget, folks, don't break up with your car. Update it with Pioneer Car Audio. Check them out at www.pioneerelectronics.com. I'd like to give a shout out to my man, Emmanuel. Emmanuel, this is one of 2 podcasts we have today. For those of you who are listening, are into mini bikes, don't miss Joe's Mini Bike Reunion podcast on Joe's Mini Bike Reunion podcast Facebook page at 7 p.m. Pacific tonight, where we'll have Ian Cordova of CB Minis as our guest. Again, brought to you by Pioneer. Have a good rest of the afternoon, everybody. Have a great rest of your week. I had a great time. I'm easily amused. I hope you did the same. I'm Joe Sebergandio, and we'll see you on the next Aftermarket Insider.